"Hi, my name is Emily, and this is the dress that made them laugh." It was secondhand, the color of faded peach, and the hem was stitched with dental floss because I didn't own real thread. I pressed it flat with an old iron, whispered to myself the effort could look like elegance if I stood tall enough. But the moment I stepped into the graduation hall, under lights too bright and merciless, the whispers began. The first laugh didn't burst. It hissed, sharp and quick, like a secret that couldn't wait to be shared. My cousin leaned into my aunt and smirked. My uncle asked if I had mistaken graduation for a costume party. Behind them, a phone angled up, its camera lens gleaming like an eye hungry for humiliation. I told myself to keep walking, to balance like a tightrope walker above their ridiculed step. Breathe, don't stumble. Their eyes didn't see me. They saw the wrinkles in my dress, the cheap fabric that clung to my arms, the seams that threatened to split if I moved too fast. They saw proof that I didn't belong among pressed gowns and polished shoes. Every giggle, every whisper was another tug at the fragile thread holding me together. But here's what they couldn't see: the late nights at the library, the essays written on borrowed laptops, the shifts spent pouring coffee until my fingers trembled. They couldn't see the bus rides with textbooks balanced on my knees, or the weight of scholarships chased like oxygen. They saw only the fabric. They didn't see the years sewn into it. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, grounding myself against the storm of laughter. The principal's microphone crackled on stage, names beginning to rise and echo across the hall. I sat perfectly still, a target painted on me by people who thought they knew my worth. Their laughter was not judgment. It was habit. It was fear of a story rewriting itself without their permission. And then came the silence before the storm, the breath the entire auditorium held at once. The microphone waited. The air pressed heavy, and I knew what was coming. My name sat on the edge of the principal's lips like fire waiting for a spark. Have you ever been mocked for how you looked, only to discover that the very stage where they laughed would soon belong to you? Would you forgive the whispers, or let the silence after your truth become the sharpest reply? The graduation hall was a cavern of echoes, every sound amplified and thrown back by the high rafters. Banners in deep navy and gold hung from the ceiling, swaying gently as if the air itself held its breath. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the basketball court, their legs screeching against the polished floor whenever someone shifted. The smell of waxed wood clung to the room, mingled with perfume and cologne, and somewhere faintly, the sugary frosting of the cakes waiting in the lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed, relentless, pouring down their cold glare onto gowns pressed smooth and shoes polished to mirrors. My dress, thin and wrinkled, absorbed that light like a confession. Parents filled the bleachers, cameras raised like weapons of pride, their voices swelling with laughter and chatter. Each cheer for students' name struck like a drumbeat, reminding me that this stage was a battlefield where belonging was tested. I sat with my classmates, hem brushing against the wooden edge of my chair. To my left, a girl in a sparkling gown adjusted her honor cords with manicured hands. The sequins scattered light across her skin, turning her into a constellation under the fluorescent sky. To my right, a boy tapped the shiny leather of his dress shoes against the floor, each tap a reminder of polish, wealth, readiness. I felt small between them, wrapped not in fabric, but in every reminder of where I came from. The flash-stitched hem scratched at my legs. I smoothed it with my palm, as though that could erase its story. Behind me, my relatives gathered like a shadow I could not shake. My aunt leaned forward, her pearls gleaming, her smile sharp with something unsaid. My cousin scrolled through her phone, glancing up only to laugh at whatever remark had been whispered into her ear. My uncle crossed his arms, shoulders hunched with satisfaction, watching me as if waiting for a performance to fail. The stage loomed ahead, dressed in symbols of honor. A polished oak podium gleamed beneath the spotlight. Velvet cases of diplomas were stacked neatly, medals glinting from a side table. Each object seemed to belong to someone else, someone who fit the picture better. The band tuned in the corner, trumpet notes colliding with the deep groan of a trombone, sharpening the air into nerves. Programs rustled like restless paper wings. Teachers lined the walls, their academic robes shifting as they whispered to one another. And in the center of it all, me small, wrinkled, misplaced. My family's eyes burned into my back, waiting, mocking, certain of the story they thought would unfold. They didn't know the script had already changed. The ceremony moved forward like a slow tide. Names rolled from the principal's lips, each one greeted with applause, each applause a wave that rose and fell before the next began. I clutched my program tighter, the paper bending under my fingers, and tried to keep my breath steady. When my cousin's name was called, the air behind me split open with noise. My relatives erupted clapping, cheering, whizzing so loudly the heads turned from other sections. She walked across the stage like she had been born for it, her gown flowing smoothly, her shoes clicking sharp and proud. She accepted her diploma with a practiced smile, lifting it high as if the spotlight had been waiting for her alone. My aunt dabbed her eyes with a tissue, beaming as if she were the mother of royalty. My uncle shouted her name again, even after the applause had faded, as though the world might forget if he didn't remind them. Then, as my cousin returned to her seat, their eyes swung back toward me. That's when the whispers began again, sharper this time, as if their joy for her required my humiliation to be complete. "Look at her dress," my aunt murmured, her voice just loud enough to carry. "She shouldn't even be sitting up front," my uncle added, a smirk tugging at his mouth. My cousin leaned toward another relative and giggled, her eyes flicking to me before turning away with deliberate dismissal. Each word was a pinprick, precise and cruel. He'd spread up my neck, and I lowered my gaze to my lap, staring at the flat-stitched hem as though it might unravel under their laughter. I wanted to shout, to tell them they had no idea what this dress had cost me, not in dollars, but in nights of sacrifice, in mornings of exhaustion, in years of silence. But my throat locked, my body frozen by the weight of too many moments just like this one. Their whispers wrapped round me like chains. Each laugh told me to stay small. Each smirk told me that my story had already been written, and it was not one where I stood in the spotlight. For a moment, I almost believed them, but deep inside, a truth pulsed, faint but steady. I knew something they didn't, something that would turn every smirk into silence. The microphone would come for me, and when it did, their laughter would not survive. Their whispers that night were sharp, but they were not new. They were only the latest echoes of a chorus I had been forced to hear all my life. Every snicker, every insult, every dismissal, they were threads in a pattern that had wrapped around me for years. I remembered being 12, standing at my cousin's birthday party. The house was filled with balloons, streamers, and guests holding wrapped gifts. I had spent the entire day helping set the table, tying ribbons, folding napkins into careful shapes. But when the cake was cut and the photographs were taken, I was nowhere in them. Not by accident. My aunt had told me to hold the camera. My cousin glowed in every frame while I existed only behind the lens. At 15, I sat at the dining table with my uncle's son, rewriting his college essays. He leaned back in his chair, bored, while I worked late into the night polishing sentences, cutting unnecessary words, weaving arguments together. He got into the school he wanted. At the celebration, when people asked how he managed, he lifted a glass to his father. My name never left his mouth. By 16, I had become invisible. At Christmas dinner, I carried trays from the kitchen, refilled glasses, cleaned plates, while my cousins sat laughing round the table. I can still hear my aunt's voice, low but clear, when she thought I wasn't near. Some children shine, others just fill space. At 17, the scholarship letter arrived, the one I had bled over essays and sacrificed weekends to earn. I ran into the living room, the paper shaking in my hands, heart racing with the need to share the moment. My uncle barely glanced up. "That's nice," he said flatly, turning back to the television. Later, I overheard him tell a neighbor it was probably a special case award, as if I had tricked someone into believing in me. These memories stack like bricks, each one pressing harder on my chest. By the time I reached graduation night, the weight of them lived inside me. Heavy but unbreakable, my family didn't see me as someone worth celebrating. I was the shadow in the corner, the helper, the afterthought, the one they could laugh at without consequence. So when they mocked my dress in that auditorium, they weren't just mocking fabric. They were mocking years of sacrifice they had refused to notice, years of resilience they had ignored, years of silence they had mistaken for weakness. What they didn't know was that every insult had built something in me they couldn't measure. They thought I was still the girl carrying trays, holding cameras, patching dresses with floss. They thought the stage belonged to someone else, but soon they would hear my name, and the story they had written for me would burn to ash in front of everyone. The ceremony moved on, name after name rising and falling like waves. My hands were damp, my pulse loud in my ears. I could feel my family's eyes drilling into me from the bleachers, smug and certain of where the night would end. Then the rhythm shifted. The principal paused, adjusting the microphone. A hush swept over the hall, soft at first, then growing until even the restless shuffling of programs stilled. She cleared her throat, her smile widening. "And now," she announced, "we honor this year's valedictorian." The air changed instantly. Parents leaned forward. Cameras clicked on. The room seemed to inhale as one. My relatives sat straighter, my aunt smoothing her pearls, my cousin lifting her chin as though the spotlight was already hers. I watched their anticipation grow, saw their smiles sharpen like knives prepared to cut me down one more time. But then my name rang through the speakers. It was like thunder in a dry sky. For a second, silence, pure, heavy silence. Then, shock rippled across the room. Heads turned. Murmurs buzzed, and applause broke out, loud, unrelenting, filling every corner of the auditorium. My aunt's hand froze on her pearls. My cousin blinked, confusion twisting her face. My uncle lowered his phone, frowning as though it had betrayed him. Every smirk they had worn crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. I rose, legs trembling but steady. The hem of my dress brushed the polished floor as I walked toward the stage. Every step felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me for years. Every clap of the audience was another stone laid on a bridge carrying me forward. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow, the helper, the punchline. I was the name on their lips, the reason the hall was roaring. The cheap dress didn't matter anymore. The moment belonged to me. And with each step closer to the microphone, I knew the story was about to change forever. I reached the podium, the metal glinting under the harsh lights as the principal slipped it around my neck. My hand shook when I gripped the edges of the lectern. But when I looked out, the sea of faces silenced me in a different way, this time not with ridicule, but with anticipation. I had written a speech. Folded neatly in my hand, the pages trembled like they wanted to fly away. But I didn't open them, not after the whispers, not after the laughter. Tonight, my voice needed no script. I began softly, so the audience leaned in. Some people think success is measured by what you wear, by how polished you look when the spotlight finds you. But what they don't see is the fight that happens long before tonight. The words gathered strength. They rolled off my tongue, steady and sure, no longer trembling. I spoke of nights in the library, when exhaustion pressed like a weight, but I turned one more page. I spoke of double shifts at the cafe, of counting change with numb fingers, of bus rides where textbooks were my only companions. I spoke of all the battles fought in silence, battles no one had ever applauded. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Teachers nodded, as bright with pride. Students stilled, faces softening as though hearing their own struggles reflected in mine. I turned my gaze deliberately toward the bleachers. My relatives sat frozen, caught under the weight of words I hadn't aimed directly at which struck them all the same. My cousin's cheeks flushed crimson. My aunt twisted her pearls until the strand strained against her neck. My uncle sat back stiffly, his jaw tight, his phone forgotten in his lap. I took a breath and raised my chin. "You can laugh at a dress," I said, the hole quiet enough to hear the hum of the lights. "But you cannot laugh away persistence. You cannot laugh away the years of sacrifice that no one bothered to see. And you cannot laugh away the truth when it finally has a microphone." Gasps echoed, then applause thundered, louder than any cheer of the night. The crowd rose, clapping, shouting, stomping their feet. The whole shook with it, with recognition, with vindication. And there I stood, in a dress they mocked, delivering a truth they could never erase. The applause thundered long after my final words, echoing off the rafters like a storm that refused to end. The principal's smile glowed as she shook my hand, but my eyes were fixed on the bleachers. That was where the real silence lived. My relatives, the ones who had whispered and mocked, were now motionless. My aunt's pearls slipped through her fingers, her hands resting awkwardly in her lap. My cousin's face burned red, her eyes darting anywhere but toward me. My uncle stared straight ahead, his mouth pressed shut, his phone clutched but dark. They had laughed so easily when they thought I was powerless. Now, in front of the entire auditorium, their laughter had been stripped away. They weren't just quiet, they were exposed. I leaned into the microphone once more, my voice calm, my tone sharp enough to cut. "To everyone who's ever been mocked for what they didn't have," I said, "let tonight remind you, they can laugh at your clothes, your shoes, your silence, but they cannot laugh away your truth. Because one day, that truth will stand on this stage, and it will not need their approval." The whole erupted again. Cheers, whistles, applause, the stomping of feet. It was an uproar that swallowed their silence whole. I stepped back, not triumphant in arrogance, but steady in dignity. My heart no longer raced with shame, but with strength. The dress was still cheap, the hem still stitched with floss, but under the lights it looked different. It looked like armor, and in that moment, the revenge wasn't in humiliating them, it was in proving them irrelevant. When the ceremony ended, the crowd spilled into the lobby like a tide breaking free. The air smelled of frosting and coffee, the hum of congratulations rising above the shuffle of gowns and the clicking of cameras. Parents hugged their children, friends posed for photos, and laughter filled the hall. Everywhere I turned, hands reached for me, teachers, classmates, even strangers, offering praise, asking for pictures, congratulating me with genuine warmth. Their voices carried louder than any whisper my family had ever thrown at me. But behind it all, I noticed the silence. My relatives lingered near the back, a cluster of stiff shoulders and downcast eyes. My aunt's pearls hung crooked, her hands restless against them. My cousin stared at the floor, her diploma clutched tightly. My uncle scrolled his phone, pretending to be distracted. Though his face betrayed the weight pressing down on him, they didn't approach me. They didn't say, "Congratulations." For once, there were no jokes, no whispers, no smirks, just silence. A silence heavier than any insult. And I didn't walk toward them either. I didn't need to. My speech, my medal, my voice had already done what years of arguments could not. The story had shifted, and they were no longer the narrators. Later that night, I hung the medal on the back of my bedroom door. My dress lay folded on the chair, wrinkles deeper than before, the flash stitching loose at the hem. But when I looked at it, I no longer saw shame. I saw proof. Proof that persistence can be dressed in rags and still shine brighter than silk. Proof that silence, when broken, can echo louder than laughter. And as I lay down to sleep, one thought burned steady inside me. They laughed at me once, but they will never laugh the same way again.